Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Brittany. Today I'm going to be introducing you to Purple Heart Armoury's Pendelziel. This is the Purple Heart Armoury Pendelziel, which is a hanging brass Pelle. So I'll unravel all of the paracord. The paracord is actually included, that way you can hang it and use it how you're supposed to. Comes with about 20 feet. Once this is all unraveled, I will show you the Pelle. So this is made out of brass and it's about 5 pounds in total. It's pretty weighty. The really cool thing about this is the fact that it is made out of brass. Brass is softer than steel, so ideally you can actually use a sharp sword with this, and it's one of the few things you can actually do Pelle work with a sharp, where you won't damage the sharp and you won't necessarily damage your Pelle, in this case the brass. So because the brass is softer, it won't actually harm the edge of your sharp sword. I had used one of my sharp swords to try out this hanging brass Pelle, and there was no damage to my sharp sword at all. However, I would caution that maybe you don't try this with your most fancy collectible sharp sword. I would maybe start off with something that you are okay with possibly having to do a little bit of edge maintenance on, and I certainly would not make thrusts on this with a really acute point. It is possible that with a very acute point, that when it makes contact directly to the point on this Pelle, that it might end up rolling that tiny little point, and then you have permanent damage to your sharp. But I ended up using 2 different sharp swords on this for thrusts, which included a cold steel hunting sword and a cold steel 1.5 hands, and there was no tip damage when I made thrusts on the Pelle itself. However, that's what this ring here is a target for thrusts through the ring, but of course there's always the chance that you mess up and you hit this solid part here by accident. So like I said, maybe don't use something with a really acute point, but something with more of like a rounded tip shape instead. Of course, you could absolutely use this with a synthetic. You could totally use this with your Federschwert. It wouldn't matter, it would work the same way. The brass does take a little bit of damage over time. I'll show you a close-up here of the Pelle itself. You can see the little scratches and the little dings and divots that my sharp sword had caused. My Feder actually didn't do any damage to it at all. This was all from the cold steel 1.5 hands and the cold steel hunting sword. The shape of this Pelle works really well in terms of, again, thrusts with the ring, but you can do a lot of winding and binding actions, and those little ridges that you see here are really great. They'll end up catching the edge of the sword and then they'll roll along it, and it'll give you the presence of like hard pressure, soft pressure. It'll roll up and down the strong and weak of your sword, and it gives you really cool feedback. I had a lot of fun playing with this. One of my friends suggested that it was like a cat toy for HEMA fencers, and I 100% agree with that. Something to be aware of when you're training with this, it is hanging and swinging, and it will gain momentum as you strike it. So what you want to be careful of is, like, when you're doing your footwork, there is a chance that this might swing, and if you step into it, it hits your hands or it hits your face, God forbid. 5 pounds of brass will actually be a little bit dangerous, so just be careful when you're training with it. Go slow, be conscientious of your space and where this is moving. The history of this Pelle is a mystery. I think that rhymes. The history is a mystery. When I was researching the historical background of this Pendelziel, I was not anticipating it to be a really interesting story. I was expecting that it would show up in some manuscript and it tells you how to use it and everybody knows exactly what's going on. Turns out that's not the case at all, and it's really quite fascinating. Apparently, this has been referenced in Johannes Birkenauer's 1556 fencing treatise. However, the validity of that actually ever existing is completely in question. The only history or documentation that we have of it is a 19th century facsimile that has also been lost. Like, we don't know where that 19th century facsimile actually is at this point, but there are 2 photocopy images of the 19th century facsimile that you can find on Wichtenauer's manuscript Purgatory. One of those 2 images shows a sketch of the Pendelziel. The images that are currently available happen to be the only documentation we have for this, and there is no text accompanying those images at all. However, I did speak to somebody who claims to have at one point owned a copy of that facsimile and said that there was text describing how to use this. Unfortunately, that facsimile has since been lost from that person. They no longer have it, and that is considered one of only 2 copies that are maybe known of. This would be the American copy. However, apparently there was also a copy of that facsimile sold in the very early 2000s or late 90s, somewhere in possibly Denmark. But ever since then, the 19th century facsimile has never resurfaced. Johannes Birkenauer's manuscript has never surfaced in the first place. Again, the only time we ever hear about it is from this facsimile. Looking at the image of the Pendelziel from the photocopy of the 19th century manuscript, it actually doesn't even look like it'd be a copy of an image from 1556. It actually looks more like a more modern looking sketch, and perhaps it was, if this facsimile was real and that was a person in the 19th century trying to redraw a 15th or 16th century piece, that might be possible, but from an art historical perspective, it does not look like a direct facsimile of a piece of art from the 1550s. So with that said, it's entirely plausible that this Pendelziel doesn't actually have a lot of historical validity to its existence. It might be something that was completely made up in the 19th century just to make this. I'm not really sure. Regardless, it's become a really interesting piece of modern historical European martial arts history. You can go back to 2012 and see some really early HEMA videos on the Pendelziel and its introduction to the HEMA community. There was, I don't want to say controversy, but definitely a lot of interest in trying to prove that this thing actually did exist. I think that's what makes it really fascinating, is that even if it wasn't something that existed in the 1500s, the fact that there's some sort of mystery around this makes it really appealing to me. And when I had done some digging and contacted some friends of mine who had connections to this and the 19th century facsimile, it was both frustrating and intriguing to end up with more questions than I had any answers. This was a really super fun addition to my training. I thought it was really, really cool. It adds a lot of new things to my training. It was very dynamic. It helped me work on footwork, targeting, fueling even. I loved it. So with that, I hope this was helpful, gave you a little bit of information about a really mysterious piece of fencing training equipment. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in seeing any videos of me actually using the Pendelziel, you can find those on my Instagram and my TikTok. If you're looking at getting a Pendelziel for yourself, you can find that on Heart Armoury's website, which I will link in the description below.